Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Wario Land. In the last part we started off the SS Teacup after finishing up Stove Canyon, and now it's time for course 30, marking the 3/4 point in the game's overall level count. Although again, this isn't exactly the 3/4 point of the LP because the rest of the levels go by pretty quickly in this one. Because either A, at this point on an average playthrough for me, I've gotten the amount of money I need in order to get the best ending stuff done, or just in general, there's a lot of shorter levels after this, even keeping in mind the treasures you have to get. So, course 30 can be a little lengthy in some cases, because there's a little bit of some extra pathways you can go along. But since at this point, I know I'll get the amount of coins I need from gunning through the levels anyway, we're also going to move a bit faster from here on anyway. With that said, there is a treasure to get in this stage. We don't need to worry about having to get it until we're almost at the boss fight anyway. The big thing you're going to want to do in levels moving forward, in the case you've gotten close or already even have the amount you need in order to get the best ending, by a minimum. Make sure you're still grabbing about 10 coins per level so you have enough to, you know, leave the level. Got a little bit of a Donkey Kong Country 2 section here, though, where we climb the ropes attached to the mast of the ship, and I think that's kind of a neat set piece. Not exactly hard to get around. There are some spider enemies around that could cause some problems, I guess, but ultimately not a lot to worry about. So, last time, we officially started going through the final main credit set that's not Gunpei Yokoi himself, the test players, so the QA team. So let's start off by talking about a couple more of them. There's the key for the treasure, by the way, now we just need to find the door. The next person in the special thanks section is Masahiko Mashimo, who is a coordinator on Elite Beat Agents, did some stamp editing for Twilight Princess HD. They were designer for Wario Land 3 and did some background designing work on Super Metroid. They were a graphic designer for Frog the Bell Tolls and Mario Land 1. And they are also in some special thanks sections like Trace Memory and Wario Land 2. Is that a goddamn football? Damn. Didn't see that coming. The next person in the special thanks section is Satoshi Matsumura, who was a coordinator for Wario Land 2, did some programming on Tetris Attack and the Virtual Boy Wario Land. They test played on this, but they were also in the special thanks section for Metroid Fusion and Super Metroid and Fire Emblem 3. For now, though, it's time for the boss fight. And it's one I actually recommend grabbing the dragon head for. This is Bobo. Bobo will try to flap their wings really hard to blow you away from him and knock you off the platform to the west. Otherwise, he'll breathe out some birds you need to jump on, then throw at him 3 times to win. If you're using the dragon head, this fight can be done in about 5 seconds or so. It's real quick. Notably, Bobo is a case of actively having a lot of cut content in the game's files, because there's a version of his sprite that's sitting down on the ground in an area that you can view the final world from. And seemingly that means he probably would have actively been the boss of the next world originally at some point in development, but they just moved him around. Which is relatively common to see happen, especially moving around level layouts is honestly pretty common as levels and games get developed. Some very famous instances of this are found in the level selects for Sonic's 1, 2, and 3, where the levels are in a slightly different order than what you play them in because that was the original intended orders, apparently. For now, though, since we finished the SS Teacup, time for the second to last world, Parsley Woods. While its world map might look and sound like a Forest of Illusion, it's really not. I do like the tile set here, though. I like the tree backgrounds. So one of the biggest hazards found in this world are spike balls that act very similarly to the fruit we saw rolling down back in that one level in the SS Teacup, where when you reach a certain point in time or a certain point horizontally in the level, they drop down and roll towards you. They will hit you no matter what you do to them, so just try to get around them. The jet hat is very good for this, as you would expect. Next up in the game testers, though, for this is Takeshi Nagareta, who, as usual for a lot of these people, special thanks to Fire Emblem 3, Super Metroid, testing player in this, Virtual Boy staff, and Teleroboxer, of course. But they were notably the hardware director for the first Wii Fit, because notably they were, I think, the lead on the Wii Balance Board project, just in general. And then they also did some circuitry stuff on some other peripherals, like I think the Donkey Kong bongos I remember reading when I was doing research for this about a week ago. I wrote some of this down in a document. Other times I just have Wobi Games open, but I do have extra bits written here and there, usually. After them in that list is Satoshi Nogami, who is only listed in 3 games, at least on Moby Games. This for Game Tester, They're in special thanks for Makaimura for WonderSwan, which is a Ghost and Goblins game for WonderSwan. And then they're also a graphic designer for Mega Man and Bass on the WonderSwan, which to my knowledge is different than Challenge from the Future. That is a literal port of Mega Man and Bass to the WonderSwan, to my knowledge. Which I found a little odd at first, but thinking about it, considering the WonderSwan was also a creation of Gunpei Yokoi and his team, probably just worked with Yokoi more directly than anything else. Afterwards, in the game testers, we got Masafumi Sakashida, who was a designer on Metroid 2 and an uncredited designer, apparently, for the Game Boy Kid Icarus game I have to cover at some point. They did some art for Galactic Pinball on the Virtual Boy, as well as Fire Emblem 4, when that released over in Japan. And they were also a printed artwork person for Super Metroid, as well as the package designer for Super Mario Land 2, period. Course 32 here is pretty straightforward. If anything, it feels a little bit more out of like Stove Canyon because it's a lot of the same railway graphics, but there's a reason for that, as we'll see later in the world. The thing is about it, though, is that it's another level that has a relatively different ending type, because our goal here is actively to hit a switch, not to find an exit. And something kind of funny about hitting this kind of switch is that it actively reveals a typo they left in the game that we'll note in another moment. Always wish that was a power-up for some reason. I don't know why I think it's going to be every time, but it never is. Although, if anything in this case, actually being Small Wario in this area is kind of helpful. We have now drained the lake, but what's notable about this is that now parsley is misspelled. Parcelli. Whoops. What's interesting about this, if memory serves from when I was looking into this, the way that this technically works is that the word parsley and the lake is a different sprite layer. So they had a separate version of the lake that's drained that had a misspelled parsley on it. We want to head back to this course, though, now that the lake is drained, because it allows us to access some extra portions of the level, including the location of a treasure for our list. And I'll take that key and just walk it all the way over there, why don't we? In the meanwhile, the next person in the game testing is Aiko Takeuchi, whose only credit in Games Outright is this as a test player. What I find funny is we go from their one credit to Keisuke Terasaki, who was a supervisor over Fire Emblem and Rare back when they used to work with the Nintendo a lot to begin with, so they're in a lot of the Rare credit games, so like Diddy Kong Racing, Donkey Kong 64, certain versions of the Donkey Kong Country games, like I think specifically the Returns games to begin with, I think, but also like the GBA versions of some of them. They notably also directed Fire Emblem 1, but they were also just general project manager and producer on stuff like Xenoblade 2 and certain of the later Paper Mario games. All over the place in Nintendo's history. It's just nice to see a name come up that often. And speaking of interesting names, the next name is one some people might already recognize. Kazumi Totaka, who is a composer on a lot of various Nintendo games. Like, they did Mario Paint, they did Mario Land 2, they did Link's Awakening, Virtual Boy Wario Land, Luigi's Mansion, I think one of the Pikmin games. They are all over the place, to the point where they have a very well-known hidden song motif they like to put into their games hidden somewhere, called Totaka Song, that's only a couple seconds long, but it's something they just like to hide in every game they work on. And it is in this! I didn't record any footage for it, so I'll see if I can do that during the time between me doing this particular part of the commentary right now and the second pass of editing later. But I think it's if you're on the game over screen for like 2 minutes it plays? Which the game over screen itself has some unique graphics I'm just not showing off because I'm not getting a game over really in this LP at all. Next up in the testing players section is another name I've covered relatively recently, Hitoshi Yamagami. I've already covered them before because they were the director of Starfy 1 and then became the producer of the series moving forward, but they're also just generally a producer on a lot of things on Nintendo consoles. Advanced Wars games, Pokemon games and spin-offs, especially Pokemon, various Xenoblade sequels. If you name a Pokemon game, they're likely in the credits of it, at least upwards towards Sword and Shield. They were also a programmer on Star Tropics 2, which I think is kind of fun to note. Another game I covered relatively recently. We'll get back to talking about the QA team and its final few members in a moment, though, because I want to talk about Course 33 here in specific. Course 33 is a little bit unique in that it's one of the only technically 3 auto-scrolling levels in the game. Its structure isn't exactly fully auto-scroller. You enter and exit train cars over and over the place to kind of mark screen lengths, but a large amount of it is auto-scrolling. And you're going to be especially hopping on train carts that will move alongside you to get from one platform to the next. Stick towards the middle of the screen if you can, but thankfully, especially with the jet head around, the screen moves at such a slow pace you don't need to worry about dying constantly over and over again. There is a notable bug involving the auto-scrolling, though, you can do in the second instance of these levels. I say there's technically 3 auto-scrollers in the game because I do count the first level of Stove Canyon because of the lava wall. But that's not quite the same kind of auto-scroller as this, if that makes sense. Good place to get some coins, though. Okay, we only have 3 QA people left to talk about, though. First off is Yukihiro Yamamoto, who did a couple of other QA roles. They were QA on God Eater 1 and 2, especially the PlayStation 4 releases. They also were a QA on the Windows release of Darksiders 1. They did general game design concept stuff for Princess Peach Showtime, which released earlier this year. But I think probably their most interesting role is that they were the graphic designer and art director for Yoshi's Woolly World and Crafted World. So that gorgeous, gorgeous felt aesthetic is effectively their choice, and that's really notable to me. Because even though, from my knowledge, the later Yoshi games got kind of bland, I love the way Woolly World and Crafted World look. They're so pretty. Next up in the QA team, we got Tomoyoshi Yamane, who is in the special thanks section of a lot of games like Mario Paint, Wario Land 2, the Wii U version of that Fatal Frame game. But in terms of more direct roles of what they know what they worked on outright, they did do some main game design for Metroid Fusion and Metroid 2, but they're usually on the art teams. They were a character designer for Frog the Bell Tolls, they did some object design for Super Metroid, they were the lead artist for the Virtual Boy Wario Land. They modeled some Pokemon for Pokemon Stadium, they did some design for Wario Land 4, they supervised the Samus model for Metroid Prime, enemy design for Metroid Fusion and all that. But I want to take a special moment to note, they're the person who outright designed the Varia suit for Metroid 2, giving it those very iconic shoulder pads at this point. So, unironically, probably one of the most important people in Metroid's history on the visual standpoint alone, which I find incredibly fascinating. And the final game tester credited is Makoto Yamauchi, who is in the special thanks section for the Persona dancing games for 3 and 5. They were the scenario writer for Persona Q2, they did some planning for Persona Q1, and they were in general a battle planner for Persona 5 and the Royal Editions. They were also a level designer for Elden Ring. And just given that they're on a Nintendo project, I want to say there's a chance they're related to Hiroshi Yamauchi, who was the 3rd president of Nintendo that died in the mid-2010s, I want to say. But I have no actual proof of that, that's just a gut feeling I have, but that could easily be disproven, honestly, because I think Yamauchi's a relatively common surname. And otherwise, the only person we haven't talked about every single credit they're on is Gunpei Yokoi himself, who's the producer. And I've talked about him a lot. Special thanks for Starfy 1, general concept and designer for Dr. Mario, and various Game & Watch games, designed the Game Boy, Virtual Boy, and WonderSwan in general, producer on Mario Land, effectively father of Metroid as a series. Very important person in the history of Nintendo, to say the least. And I just find it very interesting how many of these people all worked on this one project. And it's just so many little subsects in Nintendo's history in the long run, intersecting at various small points like this, because they were a large team that did a lot of good stuff. And it's been said before, but it bears repeating. Say what you will about PlayStation and Sony and Microsoft and Xbox. If there's one thing Nintendo has over them overall, besides a lot more money saved up from what they've been doing, because they're a game and toy company first, they put a lot more attention and love into each individual game as a product and project, because so many of these people have been at these companies for years and are still working on, at times, very connected projects to what they worked on years ago to this day. And I love seeing that. Also, very funny thing about Course 34 here, you just saw me do. The key is right next to the exit, but the final room of this stage overall is 3 large tree trunks. that have their own little item blocks and level design going on that you get to by using a various branch fork in the underwater area. You could just do a high jump or a jet jump from one branch of the tree to the other and not have to worry about backtracking back and forth through the level too much. This is part of why I think the high jump is technically unintentional in some regards. Because it just feels like that shouldn't be allowed technically, but oh well, here I am using it. Also, it just occurred to me I forgot to mention something. As of our revisit to Course 31 to get that treasure that was there, we passed 9,699 coins. Which, if you want to get the best ending, is the minimum amount of coins you need. So I don't need to worry about coins moving forward whatsoever, because I'll get whatever coins I need along the way from either the treasures or beating the final boss. And now it's time for Course 35, which is effectively Course 33 in reverse. It's now auto-scrolling towards the right, and we're still doing the alternating car section in order to have some actual platforming in the middle. This one's a little more stressful because there's a bit more of a chance at bottomless pit death, but it's not too bad all the same. There is notably a glitch you can do in this level, though, that involves the jet hat. I think it's during the auto-scrolling sections, but it might be before the auto-scrolling starts, technically. If you jump up above the screen at a certain point and use the jet hat and dash towards the left, you will loop from the left side of the screen to the right in a certain way. And doing that over and over again, you actually start to displace your place in the level design with the visuals, and you can actively cause some very bizarre visual glitches doing that. You can also technically ascend so high in the stage you end up at the bottom of the screen. I think that can actually cause you to void out and get a bottomless pit death, so watch out for that. If memory serves from watching it years ago at this point, Proton John did his own LP of this game where he did that exact thing. So if you want to see it in action, I'd recommend checking that out. I want to say that was like the second to last part of that LP in general. Auto-scrollers I know annoy some people. They only a few times bother me outright with their existence, either when the scroll is too slow or, funnily enough, too fast. Because if you have trouble keeping pace with it in either direction, it just can become either a stressful slog or a very tedious slog. Largely, I think most games have a good enough pace with their auto-scrolling camera that it's not too big of a deal, but every now and then you get a big stinker. You get a really big stinker. Not for nothing, I know I talk about the series nonstop to begin with, but Mega Man's auto-scrollers are some of the few that I think are generally very good with that. Mario gets some bad ones here and again. Honestly, one of my least favorite of all time is from a Sonic game. It's a nice visual thing, but that one from Sonic 2, you know the one, I don't like that level. At least not anymore. It goes just slow enough that's like, come on, come on. Even debug mode can't really speed it up from my memory. I might be wrong on that, though, because I haven't played Sonic 2 in a couple of years at this point, because I've just had a lot of other games to play. Like, there's still a lot of games I revisit very regularly, but there's a lot of games I used to play every year or so that even that's kind of fallen off in my patterns. Which is kind of sad in some regards, but it's just what happens as time goes on and there's more things to do, you know? Going back to the auto-scroller, though, because we're about to finish the level. If there's something I think can be an interesting exercise and, like, observation, is keeping an eye on how much you notice an auto-scrolling stage is auto-scrolling compared with the level design around it. Because I think if you're not really noticing the scrolling because you're having fun in the level in some form, that's probably a very good indicator of how strong the design is despite the reliance on an auto-scroller. Because that's a very good example of the one in Mega Man 4, for instance. I seldom notice the auto-scrolling in that because I'm usually having to work with the platforms anyway in such a way to not die. Time for Course 36, though, the final level of Parsley Woods. This level relies on some other things we see in the world, like the spike balls once again, but it has a thundercloud enemy who will try to just float above you and strike you with lightning. If you're keeping a good movement pace, especially with the jet hat, you don't have to worry about this thing at all. With that said, you can't exactly rely on the jet hat all the time here because there are going to be times where the spike balls will just try and clip you on the way down anyway. But hey, there's also some hidden big blocks around here. I forget if this is a 3-up or 100 coins, though. 3-up, I'll take that. Yeah, just from the amount of times I've died in the game to begin with, on top of the lives I've been getting. We're already at 45 lives near the end. Lives are not a problem in this game, even if you don't use the life minigame at the end of any given level. It's why I tend to rely on the gambling minigame more than not, because the coins are much more worthwhile in the long run, even if you have the amount you have and have to only get like one double on top of that. Getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, though. Not for nothing, Parsley Woods does have one thing going for it. I'd argue it has the hardest boss in the game, or at least the most dangerous boss, if that makes any sense, distinctifying the two. It's kind of like how I like to distinctify between my favorite of a game in a series and what I think is the best of a game in a series, because those can be very different things in my point of view. Because, like, say, my favorite game in the Trails series, for instance, is Trails to Azure. I think the best game in the Trails series at the moment is either Daybreak 1, from playing the fan translation of it, or Reverie, in terms of just pure gameplay. So the boss here is this ghost in the weird jack-o'-lantern cave it's in. This boss is invincible to you jumping on it itself, but you can knock the ghost it throws at you at it to do damage. If this boss touches you, and this is what makes it so dangerous, it stuns you in place for several seconds. Meaning A, one of two things will happen with the ghost that it shoots at you. Either it'll miss you completely and you can't damage it, or it'll hit you and damage you, or it'll take the opportunity to fire off a projectile of its own to damage you outright. Still a pretty fast boss, but I'd say that's probably the best boss in the game when it comes to actively trying to kill you. It's either that or the final boss on the whole. And that wraps up Parsley Woods. All that remains is the final world in the game. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 7, we're gonna go finish off the game. See you guys then.